So, hello guys and welcome back sa Room 666. Maraming nagtatanong kung ba't ko tinanggal yung ibang video ko about sa Russia or yung theory ko. Bale, part 1 and part 2 yun. Tinanggal ko siya kasi masyadong sensitive yung usapin and bawal yun dito sa YouTube. Kung i-upload ko ulit yun, possible na mabura yung YouTube natin, no? So, hindi ko i-release yung ganun. Mahirap na. Kaya naghanap ako ng video na maaaring maging foundation natin or magkaroon tayo ng background kung bakit nga ba inatake ng Russia yung Ukraine. And I think itong video na to ay possible na maunawaan nyo, maintindihan nyo kung bakit ganun nga. So, panoorin natin guys.
In this video, we're going to try and understand why Russia launched a full-scale military attack on Ukraine, and what story or narrative is being passed on to other countries in the world. Let me begin this video by saying this statement. If you have a friend like the United States, then you don't need enemies in this world.
So, totoo naman, di ba? Dahil lang US, alam natin na malakas. Excuse. Malakas sila, oo. And kapag kapit mo ang US, syempre, bilib na bilib tayo pagdating sa weapon nila, military weapon nila. And ang dating sa atin pagdating, kasi pag sinabi kasi ng US, sila yung superhero ng mundo. Kasi sila yung sugod ng sugod. Inaapi daw nila yung mga terrorist, pero hindi nyo alam na sila rin ang gumagawa ng mga terorista. Especially sa Syria, 'di ba? Russia ang tumulong sa Syria para puksain yung mga terorista doon. Nagbigay sila ng tulong. Pero sa totoo lang na yung mga terorista doon, ang pumupondo ng mga gamit diyan ay US.
When I say the United States, I don't mean the general public. I mean the United States democratic government and US deep state. And today in this Russia-Ukraine war, we can clearly see what I mean. The United States is only doing talks. They are not helping Ukraine. War has started. There is not even a single American soldier in Ukraine.
So sa tingin nyo guys, bakit nga ba hindi nagpapadala itong US ng tulong sa Ukraine? Malalaman natin guys kung bakit.
All that we are hearing is America and European countries putting sanctions after sanctions on Russia. Just think for a moment.
Ayan, kagaya niyan. Hindi nila malabanan ng pasensya na sa aso, guys. Ingay. So, kagaya nga nito, 'di ba? Hindi nila malabanan ng militar sa militar. Kung lalabanan man nila, alam nilang may palagay yung Russia. And itong Ukraine, ano bang mapapala nila sa Ukraine? Ang Ukraine, mga Russian talaga ang tao dyan sa Ukraine. And ang ginagawa lang nila ay papabaksakin daw nila yung economy ng Russia. So, sa tingin mo ba, napakalaki ng Russia? Wala bang ipon or naimbak na kahit anong stocks itong Russia? Kapag inanuhan mo to, kapag sinanksyonan mo ng na para pabagsak ng economy nila, hindi. Napakalaki ng Russia. Isa to sa mga hadlang kaya hindi nila malabanan dahil hindi nila alam kung anong capacity ng Russia, right? Kahit tanggalan mo to ng export or mag-import, hindi mo kagad basta-basta mapapabagsak ng ganun-ganun lang yung Russia. Sa totoo lang, sila talaga may pinakamalakas na weapon and hindi nila pinapakita yun. Yung mga paglusob nila na yun, wala yun. Wala pa yun sa kalingkingan ng kaya nila. Kaya hindi pa gumagawa ng move itong US.
Don't you think Russia has done the calculations? If Western power put economic sanctions on Russia, don't you think Russia already knows that? And that will affect the country's economy. Don't you think Russia knows that? Even then, Russia sent troops to Ukraine. So in this video, we're going to analyze this whole scenario. First of all, don't get carried away by the Western media's conclusion Don't form any conclusion based on media reporting. This issue
Isa pa to, pagdating sa media, hawak din yan ng US. Papabor yung mga media na yan sa US. Lagi nilang pinapabango yung pangalan ng US, di ba? Kahit dito naman sa atin, yun yung nakasanayan natin eh. Pagdating US, mayroon tayong utang na loob sa nila dahil tinulungan nila tayo. Pero, win-win situation kasi sa kanila yun eh. Mapapabango nila yung pangalan nila and magkakaroon sila ng advantage sa isang bansa kapag tinulungan nila yon. Tama. Kaya siguro si Duterte, and kung makikita nyo sa mga interview ni Marcos, na ayaw nilang umasa sa ibang bansa. Gusto nila magkaroon ng solid na foundation na military forces tong bansa natin. Which is meron naman talaga dati. Nasira lang simula nung umupo yung mga dilawan. Pinabayaan nila. Sa tingin nyo ba, kung nagpatuloy yung ganong kalakas na military forces natin, hindi tayo makakapalag sa China. Makakapalag tayo, kaso wala na pabayaan. So, anong gagawin ng Pangulo? Hindi mo pwedeng sugurin yun ng basta-basta. Dahil talagang isang bahing lang ng China sa atin. Possible talaga tayong yung mga nagsasabi ng mga politics dyan, mga politician dyan na nagsasabi ng ipaglalaban ko ang China, ipaglalaban ko. Sa paanong paraan, yun yung tanong. Ipaglalaban mo, pero paano? 'Di ba? Ano, may paglaban ka ng salita-salita lang? Hindi nga tayo pinapansin ng China. Salita kayo ng salita dyan, hindi naman tayo pinapansin. 'Di ba? What more kapag nagkabrasuhan na? 'Di ba? Kaya mo bang ipagtanggol ang Pilipinas? Hihingi ka na naman ng tulong sa ibang bansa. Yun yung mga foundation na ginagawa nila. Nagpapalakas. Pinapalakas muna nila yung military forces natin. Sa katunayan, si Duterte, umorder yan ng mga weapon sa Russia noong 2017. Kasi alam niyo kung gaano ka solid or ka kaganda or quality, gaano kaganda ang quality ng weapon ng Russia. Hindi kagaya ng sa US, umorder siya pero mga palyado naman daw. Makikita nyo yun sa ibang interview sa kanya.
is much deeper and it is personal for Russia. It is about securing Russia's national interest. If I have to summarize this issue, it is all about Russia securing and protecting its territory or motherland versus NATO expansion. The reason
Yun, isa pa. Dito kasi, gustong kumampi ng Ukraine sa NATO. Which is, yung NATO, kasama dyan ang mga Western country, European. Kung mangyayari yun, napaka-independent ang Russia. Kung ang Ukraine ay sasapi sa NATO, bastusan na yun para sa Russia. Dahil ang Ukraine, mga Russian din yan. Tingnan mo naman kung makikita nyo yung mapa ng Ukraine sa Russia, napakaliit. Tapos doon ka pa kakampi sa napakalayo sa kabilang ibayo. 'Di ba? Nakakabastos 'yun.
Russia attacked Ukraine is because it does not want the United States and NATO installations and weapons, including nuclear weapons, anywhere near the Russian border. Whether you agree with Russia or not, Putin
Ganun nga mangyayari. So, kung magkakaroon ng NATO sa Ukraine, possible sila maglagay ng mga weapon doon. Anong mangyayari kapag nagkaroon ng giyera? Ukraine ang talo pa rin dahil ang Ukraine ang sisirain. Hindi yung Amerika, hindi ang US. Maintindihan nyo guys. Ukraine, kung baga gagawin nilang pandepensa tong Ukraine sa Russia, magde-deploy ng mga weapon, and yung weapon na yun gagamitin. 'Di ba? Yung Ukraine pa rin ang kawawa.
has a reason. If you remember, the United States and NATO did the same thing in Turkey while attacking Syria. Before 2013, the headquarters of NATO Allied Air Command for Southern Europe was in Izmir, Turkey. The United States gave some 90 B-61 nuclear bombs to Turkey, which are also right now there at the Incirlik Air Base.
Yan, dati, in Turkey, napaka-pro-Russian, tapos nagiging balimbing dahil nga namamanipulate ng US. See guys, kung gaano kayo or yung ibang tao dyan na manipulate ng US, ganun katindi ang manipulation nila. Sabihin nating utang na loob, pero they take advantage of that.
These bombs were kept there in case of any nuclear conflict, and of course, their use requires the approval of NATO. Don't you think Russia is aware of it? In fact, Russia was supporting Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. So today, if United States and NATO forces have eyes on Ukraine, do you think Russia will not do anything about it? If tomorrow American weaponry arrives in Ukraine, Moscow is 35 minutes away if you want to use Tomahawk rockets. And suppose if you want to use hypersonic missiles, Moscow is just 5 minutes away from Ukraine. Russia from day one has been saying to the United States and NATO to stay away and do not interfere in Ukraine. The problem that you see in the eastern part of Ukraine, that is in the Donbas region, it is happening since 2014. It is now 8 years. Again, I will repeat what I said in my previous video. If Russia wanted to attack or invade the eastern part of Ukraine, it would have done it long back. The reason why Russia attacked now is that the United States and European Union countries did not listen to Russia's demand. The United States lives on the other side of the ocean. It practically has no threat to its territory from any big country. But if you see, the United States goes around everywhere in the world and creates conflict. Do you think that is correct?
See, sila din yung gumagawa ng conflict sa iba't ibang bansa, di ba? Kagaya ng sinabi nito. They manipulate a country. Ginagamit nila yung pangalan nila para manipulahin yung mga country na mas mataas sila or mas malakas sila. Tayo rin naman ay ginaganon tayo eh. Sa pamamagitan ng pagsabi ng utang na loob. Guys, gumising na kayo.
Russia had a very simple demand. Just stay away from Ukraine, that's it. But no, the West had to interfere. Even Ukraine joined the bandwagon. And now Ukraine is all alone. Nobody is coming to help them. All these Western countries are just doing talks. Meetings after meetings, giving media interviews, asking the world to pray and whatnot. So the real problem of this war is the United States. And then few European countries also supported the United States. Because initially, Germany and few other Euro countries were not aggressive towards Russia. But now European Union and United States have a joint approach. So you see, it was Ukraine and Russia's matter. They could have solved it diplomatically. But now the matter has become worse. And it will only stop when Russia gains control of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. Because somewhere Russia knows that if today it let go Ukraine, then again tomorrow Ukraine will repeat it. And it will go on. Ukraine will do what Russia does not want Ukraine to do. So Russia is thinking, let's put a break to this matter once and for all. Now I know many of you are also thinking, well, America is interfering because Ukraine is a democracy and it does not want to be controlled by the Russian dictatorship. Well, first of all, what you have to understand is that Western countries are not the sole custodian of democracy. They have a version of democracy which is called liberal democracy. Every country has democracy, but they have their own version of democracy. Democracy cannot have a single version which the United States and the European countries constantly preach to the world. Democracy has different versions. And the next thing is, who told you Russia has dictatorship? Russia has its own model of governance. Just because someone's model of governance is different from the United States and European countries' model of governance, is it right to put a negative label? So what you have to understand is that Russia has a different model of governance, which is not the same as the Western model of governance. But if today we all are feeling bad for Ukraine, then we also have to equally feel bad for Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen.
Ayan, di ba? Ayan lang naman yung mga pinag-aano ng US. Di ba? Nakikita nyo? Ngayon nakikita nyo na, pero ba't hindi nyo makita dati? Tumulong ang Russia sa mga bansa na to. Ay,
And also to a certain extent Iran. But if you notice, the narrative is different about all these countries. It's all because of Western media. That is why today we don't feel as bad about these countries as Ukraine. So I'm repeating again, Russia attacked Ukraine because Ukraine and the Western countries repeatedly ignored Russia's concern.
ang nangyayari dito kasi parang pinoprovoke pa ng US itong Ukraine para sumalungat sa Russia. Siyempre, papakampahin nila sa kanila yan, makapag-deploy ng weapon, and kapag nagkaroon ng giyera talaga, yung Ukraine unang mababasag. Ang mangyayari, masama na naman ng Russia. Pero ang nagagawa ng conflict talaga dito is US. Business nilang giyera. Ha? Kapag may nasasakop silang bansa, anong mangyayari? Kukuhanin nila yung mga resources. 'Di ba? Sa Saudi, 'di ba? Saudi ba? Um, yung about sa mass weapon destruction daw na sinugod nila si ano, kalimutan ko pangalan. Basta, pero hindi nila napatunayan. Pero ba't hanggang ngayon, nandun pa rin yung mga tauhan ng US? 'Di ba? Hawak na nila, sa kanila nila yung bansa na yun sa leeg.
Again, many of you, because of Western media, also believe that Russia has always interfered in Ukraine's domestic affairs. That is why Ukraine has an inclination towards European countries and the United States. Now, my question to you is, do you think if Ukraine allies with the United States and other European countries for support, do you genuinely believe in your heart to heart, do you believe Ukraine can remain sovereign? No, it cannot. That means Ukraine cannot remain sovereign country as long as US and Russia exist. Then what do you think Ukraine should do? Ukraine should adopt the policy of non-alignment, like how India does. Of course, India is also right now in a tight spot. But the point is, until a country gains international reputation, it should always follow the policy of non-alignment.
Tignan nyo ito nga yung sa Russia ay sa India. Ang India, noong 1971 war, Russia ang tumulong. Nag-take advantage ba ang Russia? Hindi. Ang Ukraine ang hihingi ng tulong sa India. Tumulong ba ang India? Hindi. That means, alam nila na matinutong Russia eh. Tumulong pa nga sila noong 1971 war eh. 'Di ba? Nag-take advantage pa? Hindi.
And now again, many of you will say, Ukraine always wanted to be an independent country, but Russia does not allow Ukraine to be one. But again, that is also not fully true. Notice I said not fully true. Of course, we have to agree that Russia has some influence on Ukraine. That is natural, right? 30 years ago, it was all one country. Plus, ethnically, Ukrainians and Russians are very mixed. There is very little difference in their cultures. But then look at it this way. Russia has always helped Ukraine. From 1991 to 2013, Russia has given massive subsidies to Ukraine, which is estimated around $250 billion. Then Russia has also waived off Ukrainian debts, which were accumulated during the Soviet era. And if you see the other way, Ukraine has made many attempts to cheat Russia, sometimes in the form of stealing gas. Russia used to give gas at a subsidized rate so that the Ukrainian government could pass on the benefit to the domestic consumers.
See, hindi naman sila nagta-take advantage. Sila pa nagbibigay. Pagkatapos gusto nilang tirahin patalikod tong Russia. Kasi nga, namamanipulate sila.
Who are old pensioners. There are many old people in Ukraine who are poor. They don't have that much of money, and they were once part of the Soviet culture. Plus, many of them are also Russian speaking. So instead of giving gas at a subsidized price to the domestic consumers, it was resold to industrial enterprises. And then Ukraine also did not return some of the Soviet assets that were allocated to Russia, which were part of the commitments before Ukraine gained independence. So if you consider all these things, then somewhere Russia also feels betrayed and cheated by Ukraine. I'll give a similar example in the Indian context. When Pakistan was separated from India in 1947, even India gave a lot of resources and money to Pakistan. But what did India get in return? Betrayal. India fought 4 wars against Pakistan. Now I am not replacing Ukraine with Pakistan. I'm just giving you an example to understand when a small country gets separated from a big country and starts working against the parent country's interest. And surprisingly, both in Ukraine's and Pakistan's context, it was always the United States. Why do you think India never took back the POK region till now? It was always the fear of American interference. Anyhow, again in 2014 Euromaidan protest, which was basically a coup, it was sponsored by the United States and European countries. So,
Sinusuportahan nila yung mga kudita-kudita na yan. Diba? Siyempre, kudita yan eh. Eh di mas maraming papabor sa nilang mga tao.
don't say that Ukraine is a sovereign country. Its fate either lies in the hands of Russia or the West. Sovereign is a fancy word that is used quite often, just like the word peace. Plus, if you see at the face value, United States has always given assurance to Russia that they will not expand towards the Russian borders. But still, the United States used to interfere in the affairs of Central and Eastern Europe.
Yun naman pala eh. Hindi nagsabi na yung US na hindi sila mag-interfere. Pero pilit pa rin nila na umanib sa kanila yung Ukraine. In fact na itong Ukraine kasama to sa Russia tabi lang 'di ba? Conflict talaga US talaga yung gumagawa ng conflict dito sa mundo natin. Tutulong nga and then parang papabanguhin lang nila yung pangalan nila.
European countries in the name of development and democracy by giving foreign aid. But then it turned out everything was the opposite. So the real war is between the West and Russia. Ukraine is the springboard through which the US wanted to threaten Russia militarily. And before anyone knew, Russia attacked Ukraine, and now they are heading to the capital city of Kyiv. What did the United States do apart from talking to the press? They should have helped Ukraine. Sanctions don't help, because sanctions are only good if monitored. There are many channels of doing business, and there is always some country which is willing to trade for cheaper import. Can the West monitor everything in the world? Let me explain to you what sanctions are. Suppose you have a big house, and you tell your child not to step out of the house. But can you keep an eye 24 hours and every corner of the house? There are many ways of getting out of the house. Similarly, just putting sanctions is not good enough. You also have to monitor it and see to it that your sanctions are being followed. There are many channels through which countries can do trade without even letting anyone know. And furthermore, we don't see Russia trembling or breaking any sweat listening to these sanctions. That means Russia has proper plans. And one more thing you also have to understand is that US sanctions will also hurt the European economy. Europe depends on Russia for almost 40% of its energy supply. That is why you see oil prices are all-time high. So I believe Russia is self-dependent. In Hindi we call it Atmanirbhar. Plus Russia also knows that if the West collectively does not want to listen to Russia's demand and wants to put sanctions, and if they can bear the consequences of that, then why does Russia have to be so worried? Everybody will suffer. So you have to understand that if the United States wants to build military bases in Ukraine,
Di ba? Russia pa yung pinagkukuhanan ng oil, mga import dito sa Germany. Tapos ganyan gagawin nila. Di paano na? Isasara niyo, magsa-sanction kayo dyan ng economic crisis para sa Russia. Di kayo rin yung nalugi. Di ba? Kung hindi nyo pag-isipan maigi, mamanipulate talaga kayo.
in the name of NATO, then obviously Ukraine will have American troops, artillery, and missile defense systems which are going to be literally minutes away from Russia. Then what do you expect from another superpower? And one more thing that I want you to remember is that it was the Democratic Party under Obama who organized the Euromaidan coup. Even at that time, they did not send NATO forces to help Ukraine when Russia was taking over Crimea. Now what will happen is, as far as I can understand, Russia will take over Kyiv, and regarding the Donbas region, Putin will conduct referendums in Donetsk and Luhansk to determine what the people who live in those regions want to do. And since we know that the majority of the residents are Russian ethnic, they will vote for Russia, and that is how Putin will justify the intervention. And then, as you know, America and its allies will reject the validity and outcome of the referendum because that will suit their political ambition to restrict the economic development of Russia. But at the same time, there will be many other countries that will accept the outcome, and then some countries will be neutral about it. And that's how everything will be back to normal. In the end, I just want to quickly add a few more points. Do you remember when did the communist ideology take over the Soviet Union? It was in 1917. The 10 years from 1917 to 1927, the Russian Empire saw a radical transformation into a socialist state. And then in 1922, the Soviet Union started. So from 1917 to 1922, it was Soviet Russia, and after 1922 till 1991, it was the Soviet Union. And before 1917, it was the Russian Empire. And Nicholas II was the last emperor of the Russian Empire, which had a massive extension across Eurasia since 1721. So basically in 1917, there was a Russian civil war, where the Bolsheviks took control. Who were the Bolsheviks? They were far leftist, Marxist followers, and their founder was Vladimir Lenin. Anyhow, I'm not going to make this a history lesson. Perhaps I'll make a separate video on the history of the Soviet Union. Anyways, the point that I'm trying to make is that it was in 1917 when communists gained control over Soviet Russia, and their aim was to destroy capitalism and create a socialist society. The thing about communism is that they don't believe in culture, religion, or in the idea of the nation. So naturally Lenin, Stalin, then Nikita Khrushchev, Boris Yeltsin, All of them destroyed the Russian culture, the nationalist sentiments, and did not do anything to revive it. And then in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, 15 republics which together formed the Soviet Union all got separated. The Western countries started preaching to the world that they have completely destroyed the Soviet Union. They have created a new history. The end of the Cold War was seen as a victory of democracy over communism. And that is where the world started thinking communism is associated with dictatorship. Actually, that is correct, but you also have to understand that at the ground level, communist ideology takes birth from radicalization. At first, you need a breeding ground. After that, you need to charge the public, making people oppose some ideas. It could be against the government, culture, religion, and then emerge as a sustainable and a viable political option for those radicalized people. So the leader is not the problem, the ideology is the problem. That is why communist ideology does not care about territorial boundaries. Two groups of people living in a separate country can have similar views if they are communists. That is why you will see the same ideology in worker unions, employee unions, railway unions. Wherever there is union, you will get hints of communist ideology. Always remember, communists have always participated in charging people. They have an anti-establishment mindset. They will tell you things like you are poor because that person is rich. They will talk in such a sweet manner and convincing manner that you will not even realize when you got radicalized. That is how they charge people. So communism is a mindset. So after 1991, the Western powers started preaching to the world that they have destroyed the Soviet Union. They have created a new history. They created a narrative. End of Cold War is seen as a victory of democracy over communism. And that is where the world started thinking communism is associated with dictatorship. But what happened was by 1991, communism was out of Russia. As I said, communism is an ideology. It is a mindset. So it left Russia in 1991 after destroying 70 years of Russian culture. But then it moved deep into the Western society and it destroyed their culture, values, everything. That is why you will see that today in the United States, Canada and European countries, there's a huge identity crisis. All of the material progress, their per capita GDP, their democracy, prosperity is of no use. People are neck deep in consumerism. They have gone woke. They don't even respect their elders. All they want is more rights. There is no culture, there are no values, there are no ethics, no feeling of nationalism. Unfortunately, the same Western lifestyle is slowly spreading in India. Anyhow, on the other hand, after 1991, when the
Actually, pati yung sa Philippines, di ba? Yung Western lifestyle ay ano na rin sa atin, napapasa na. Nababaliwalaan rin yung mga culture. Nakikita nyo ba yon? Nawawala na, hindi nawawala na yung pagpapahalaga natin sa agrikultura, sa kultura. Hindi kagaya dati. Marami ng, kahit yung mga bata ngayon, basta kung ano lang makita nila or maipakita sa kanila ng media, that's it. Kung sino yung sabihin masama na yun, sabihin na natin na kailangan talaga ng research. Pero ang tanong, tama ba yung pinagkukuha mo ng information? 'Di ba? Maraming gustong ng kalayaan, pero hindi nyo napapansin sa sobrang liberal na natin. Tama ba? Ay nawawala na yung ano natin eh. Yung kung ano ba tayo talaga mga Pilipino. Masyado na tayong napapalayo, masyado na tayong na-westernize. 'Di ba? Hindi tayo ganito dati.
Soviet Union collapsed, Boris Yeltsin became the president. Communists have a symbol, if you remember, hammer and sickle. On December 25th, 1991, the communist flag was lowered for the last time over the Kremlin, thereafter replaced by the Russian tricolor. That means Boris Yeltsin became the first president of the Russian state. He was the president till 1999. Even he did not do anything to revive the old Russian culture, the religious values, and the nationalist sentiment. And if you remember, in 1999, he handed over the charge to Vladimir Putin. And since then, he was either the prime minister or the president. So you can say Vladimir Putin is the first leader in Russia to have revived the old Russian culture, religious values, and national sentiments. And that is how the Western media tries to show Vladimir Putin and Russia as a villain. The Democrats in the
Oh, 'di ba, pinagmumukha na naman masama si Putin. Kasi nga ang na-western masyado na kasing ano yung western country, liberated, eh. Eh, hindi naman talaga gano'n tayo. Kahit naman sa Russia, tingnan mo, binalik ni Putin, ni-revive ni Putin yung culture nila, yung religious values and nationalist sentiments. Tayo, pawala na rin sa atin yan, guys. Napapansin nyo ba? Pawala na ng pawala yan. Nawala na rin sa atin yan. Dahil masyado na tayong nabawesternize.
The United States are actually the communist mindsets. And you can also see that today, United States has charged Ukraine so much that it has to fight alone with Russia. And what is the United States doing? It is asking the world to come together. And on the other hand, Russia is saying, no one will interfere in this fight, stay out of it. So Russia is actually fighting for its motherland, for its territory, and for also its own people who live in Ukraine. Honestly, the Western power had to just stay out of this. Ukraine got carried away in sweet talks of the Western countries. Unfortunately, today it is in trouble.
Tignan nyo, ganito mangyayari sa bansa nyo kapag yung presidente nyo, puro drama lang alam. Eh ano to eh, actor tong presidente ng Ukraine eh. Puro drama lang alam niyan. Anong alam niyan sa politics? Tignan nyo, sa gera, anong alam niyan? May ganito ba yan? Wala. Panay ganito. Panay dasal, pagmamakaawa. Hihingi ng tulong sa iba. Ngayon, hindi sila makatayo sa sarili nila pa. Kailangan natin ng leader na makakapagpatibay ulit ng Pilipinas, na makakatayo tayo sa sarili natin pa. Ba, pag nagkamali kayo ng boto, sabi ko sa inyo, umiyak-iyak na lang at humingi na naman ng tulong tong Pilipinas sa ibang bansa. Sige kayo. Ayusin yung pagboto nyo. Yung may alam sa politics. Pati dito sa international law. Huwag yung puro drama. Nakakaiyak. Ganito mangyayari sa atin. Tignan nyo. Actor. Presidente nila. Ano nangyari?
I hope you found this video informative. Thank you for watching it.
So, ayun na nga guys. Sana may natutunan kayo and naliwanagan kayo kung bakit nga ba inaatake ng Russia tong Ukraine. Because this is their motherland. Ang mga tao dito, Russian speaking din. Pero gusto nilang sumapi sa Western. Ganyan na mangyayari kapag nagkamali kayo ng binoto. So guys, sana may napulot kayong aral sa video natin. And naintindihan nyo kung ano yung in-explain niya, di ba? So hanggang dito na lang muna guys. Maraming salamat. Bye.